In the autumn of 1972, the quiet ranching community of Absarokee, Montana was unsettled by the disappearance of two little girls. 10-year-old twins Alice and June North had been helping their grandfather herd goats through the dense morning fog rolling off the Beartooth foothills. But when the sun dipped behind the ridgeline and the goats wandered home without them, something dark began to settle over the land. They had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a blood-stained rock at the edge of a bluff and a single red ribbon torn from June's braid. But 36 years later, when a hiker named Lindsey stumbles upon a child's boot and small bones inside a hollowed tree, she uncovers a truth so horrific it would unravel the very fabric of the North family's legacy and lead to the most unthinkable betrayal imaginable. Back in '72, search parties had combed the hills. Volunteers on horseback, dogs, flashlights cutting thin beams through the swirling fog. But the landscape gave nothing. The only thing colder than the early frost was the silence. Even the goats kept their distance from the bluff. The twins had always been seen together, laughing, arguing, dreaming. Alice was the taller of the two, more assertive. June, quieter, had a habit of tracing letters into the dirt with a stick while she walked. On that day, they'd worn matching wool sweaters and lace-up boots. By the third morning, the only things recovered were the ribbon tangled in sagebrush and the rock smeared with blood that would later match June's blood type. No bodies, no prints, no signs of struggle. The sheriff, overworked and under-resourced, made a public appeal. Tips came in. Some claimed they saw a shadowy figure trailing the goats. Others said the girls had been heard screaming, though no one could agree on direction or time. 3 names rose from the fog of rumor. Tommy Black, the teenage neighbor with a cruel streak and an unshakable fixation on Alice. Dale Mercer, the reclusive ranch hand recently fired by the girl's grandfather. And Curtis Laurie, a family friend with unpaid debts and a too familiar smile. No arrests were made. The case went cold, and the mountains swallowed the truth. Absarokee was a small town in the way that makes silence louder. When the girls vanished, the schoolyard murmurs became pointed questions, and coffee shop chatter took on the weight of suspicion. Everyone knew the North family, or thought they did, and everyone had an idea of what might have happened. The sheriff said the land was too wild, that maybe the girls had wandered too far and met the mountain's indifference. But not everyone believed that. Not with the blood on the rock. Not with the ribbon caught like a warning in the wind. In quiet corners, people began naming names. Tommy Black was first. At 13, he was already broad-shouldered and brooding. His father drank. His mother had left. Tommy was known to follow Alice, always Alice, with eyes that stayed too long. A few months earlier, he'd trapped both girls in an old tool shed behind the schoolhouse, said it was a joke. Alice had screamed. June had cried. Then there was Dale Mercer, the North's ranch hand. He'd lived in a trailer out by the southern fence line, quiet as dust always, with grease under his fingernails. He'd been fired just 2 weeks before the girls vanished, some dispute over missing tools and late-night absences. No one saw him the day after the disappearance. His trailer sat abandoned for weeks before the sheriff finally entered it. Inside, the air was stale, the bed cold. Dale had vanished like smoke. And finally, Curtis Laurie. The town liked him. He was mild-mannered, helpful, always smiling. He owned a small feed supply shop and had known the North family for decades. But it was whispered that he owed the grandfather money, more than $1,000, from a failed investment. The debt had come due that week. He'd been at the ranch that morning repairing a section of fence. Said goodbye around noon. No one thought to question him further. He had, after all, brought dinner to the search team that first night. But as the years passed, the names faded into the soil along with the memory of the twins' voices on the hillside. People moved on. Or tried to. But some wounds fester in silence. Then, in 2008, the earth began to speak again. Tommy Black never outgrew the town's suspicion, nor did he try to. By 1972, he had already earned a reputation for cruelty disguised as mischief. He lived with his father in a sagging farmhouse on the North Ridge. His eyes were heavy-lidded, calculating. He rarely smiled. 2 months before the disappearance, Alice and June had gone missing for nearly 3 hours after school. When they were finally found, crying faces smeared with dirt, they led their teacher to the old storage shed behind the gymnasium. Inside, they pointed to the broken latch, the overturned bucket they'd stood on, to yell through a small window. Tommy stood nearby silent. When questioned, he muttered that it was just a prank. Alice had told her grandfather that night. He'd stormed over to the Black farm, fists clenched. The sheriff intervened before it came to blows. Nothing further came of it. No charges, no apology. In the weeks that followed, Tommy's behavior darkened. He skipped school, was caught carving symbols into the bleachers with a pocket knife. A classmate recalled hearing him whisper Alice's name in the hallway over and over again like a chant. Another said Tommy had once shown him a red hair ribbon he claimed he'd kept from the shed incident. When the twins vanished, Tommy said he'd been at home chopping wood. His father, drunk, disoriented, confirmed the alibi. Barely. But Tommy's connection to the girls, especially Alice, was undeniable. And his anger when she ignored him had not gone unnoticed. Years later, in 2009, investigators reopened the case after the discovery in the forest. Tommy, now in his 50s and still living in the same house, was interviewed again. He denied everything. He claimed not to remember the shed or the ribbon. But when asked if he'd ever seen the hollowed tree where the bones were found, he stiffened. "Why would I go that far up the ridge?" he asked too quickly. A new search of his property turned up a rusted harmonica beneath a floorboard in the shed, a child's harmonica weathered by time and soil. The kind June was known to carry on a string around her neck, but Tommy's voice remained flat. "I didn't do nothing," he said. "She just stopped talking to me. That's all." Dale Mercer was a man of few words and fewer friends. He arrived in Absarokee in the spring of 1971, hired by John North, the twins' grandfather, as a ranch hand after a younger worker broke his leg during lambing season. Dale kept mostly to himself, slept in a beat-up trailer down near the creek, fixed things without being asked, ate his meals alone. People said he had a quiet temper like water frozen just under the surface. In August of '72, John fired him. Tools had gone missing. A .22 rifle disappeared from the barn. And once Alice came running in from the pasture saying Dale had been watching them, just standing still in the tree line, not moving, not blinking. When questioned, Dale said he was just making sure the girls didn't wander, but something in his tone didn't sit right with John. Dale packed up that night. The trailer was found empty the next morning. His last paycheck was never collected. After the twins vanished, his name was on everyone's lips. A man dismissed under suspicion with no roots and no one to vouch for him. A loner with a short fuse. The sheriff's men scoured the area. No signs. No forwarding address. No family to contact. Dale had gone to Earth. In 2008, when the child's bones surfaced in the hollow tree and a carved D was found scratched into the inside bark, it seemed too perfect, too expected. A D shallow and deliberate, no bigger than a thumbprint. There were also tally marks, 38 of them, uneven and jagged. Forensics dated the carvings to the early 70s. Dale Mercer became the prime suspect again. His photo, aged by computer, was distributed to nearby counties. But no trace. It was as though the fog had swallowed him, same as the girls. Yet one ranger noted something odd about the tree. The D was carved in reverse like a mirror image backward, as if copied by someone unfamiliar with the letter's shape. It was a small thing, overlooked in the excitement of having any suspect resurface. But sometimes the truth slips in not through what is present, but through what doesn't quite fit. Curtis Laurie had been part of the Norths' lives for decades. He was the kind of man who lingered at the edges of every community photo, slightly out of focus, always smiling. A former classmate of John North's, he ran the local feed and tax store, kept his books tidy, and hosted a barbecue each July behind the shop. People trusted him. But behind closed doors, Curtis owed money. A quiet loan taken from John North in the winter of 1971. $1 and $200 meant for a delivery truck that never came. The debt was never public. But in a town like Absarokee, secrets walk on thin ice. The day the girls vanished, Curtis was at the ranch. He'd come early to help with a section of fencing the goats kept slipping through. He stayed for nearly 3 hours. He brought his harmonica, as he often did, whistled while he worked. According to John, Curtis left around noon. He waved, said something about repaying the debt soon, smiled that wide, flat smile of his. No one saw him again until just after dusk, when he arrived at the search party with a thermos of coffee and a crate of supplies. He stayed through the night, fetching things, offering maps, keeping the other volunteers organized. The sheriff thanked him publicly. But there were things about Curtis people remembered only much later, like how he'd once asked June too insistently to play her harmonica at the county fair, how he'd been the one to suggest the girls help herd goats that day to build character, how he always brought extra food to church picnics but never ate any of it himself. And when the button was found years later buried in the dirt beneath the hollow tree, no one thought of Curtis at first. It was faded plastic red and white with a sunburst design around the edges. A fragment half the size of a coin. Investigators logged it, but without context, it meant little. It was only when an old photo surfaced Curtis at the 1972 county fair wearing a comical "I'm Goat Grandpa" button on his vest that the connection formed. The same sunburst, the same style. That button had only been made for one day, worn by one man. Curtis Lowry. The wind shifted the day Lindsey Wexler stepped off the trail. It was early September 2008, cool, quiet, and still. She'd been hiking alone, a weekend ritual. The trail near Absarokee was steep but familiar. She wasn't looking for anything, but the forest had a way of showing its wounds when it was ready. She noticed the tree first, a cottonwood twisted at the base like something had struck it long ago. A hollow had formed where the trunk split its opening dark and wide enough for a child to hide in. Something pale caught her eye. A boot weathered and half swallowed by the earth. Child-sized. The laces were gone. The sole cracked. She reached in carefully. The smell was wrong. What Lindsey found inside the hollowed trunk stopped her breath. Bones, small, fragile, curved like twigs but unmistakably human. A narrow jawbone, bits of faded wool. She dropped her pack, backed away, and dialed the sheriff. The forensics confirmed it within days. The remains were Alice and June North, his. The forest had preserved them, dry roots wrapped through the bones like threads. A second boot was found deeper in the hollow, along with what appeared to be a strip of leather cord. Nearby, faintly carved into the bark's interior wall, were initials. J.N. And beneath those, the strange series of tally marks, 38. No one spoke as the coroner read the results. The girls had died in different ways. One likely Alice of blunt force trauma. The other June by dehydration. Days, possibly weeks later. The town reeled. People came out of their homes, clutching each other, whispering names that hadn't been said in years. Tommy, Dale, Curtis. The sheriff reopened the case. New eyes, new tools, new purpose. Yet the tree in its silence told only fragments. It gave no motive, no witness, only clues. And one final artifact buried beneath the roots so easily overlooked in the dirt would later prove that the forest, while slow to speak, never forgets. The carved D was small, just a few inches tall, hidden beneath the initials and the tally marks barely visible in the scarred interior of the cottonwood's hollow. But once seen, it couldn't be unseen. Investigators circled it with fresh urgency. The letter was clear, though roughly done, scratched into the bark with something sharp, shallow enough that time hadn't erased it. Dale Mercer. The theory returned full force. The ex-ranch hand. Fired weeks before the girl's disappearance. Gone without a word. It fit. Too well. Some said Dale had been violent, that he carried a hunting knife at all times, that he knew the back trails better than anyone, having helped build some of the oldest fence lines on the north property. His trailer, long since sold and repurposed, had been stripped years ago, but investigators tracked the lot number and spoke to the current owner. Beneath the floorboard near the bed, they found an old metal button plain, undecorated, with the initials W.S. etched faintly into the underside. The sheriff speculated it came from Willow Springs, the logging camp 20 miles east. Dale had mentioned working there once in passing. It was the only real clue to his whereabouts since 1972. A quiet man, a temper, A disappearing act, now a carved initial. The case against him was almost too neat. But the letter was wrong. A forensic linguist called in from Missoula examined the carving in detail. The D was curved awkwardly. The stroke pattern suggested it had been carved backward, mirrored, done by someone unfamiliar with the letter's construction, possibly by a child, or by someone pretending to be one. What's more, the tally marks overlapped inconsistently. Some were etched deeply, others faintly. A pattern emerged, the first 10 carved cleanly with precision. The rest messier, slanted, almost frantic. One investigator asked a question that stopped the room cold. Why carve tally marks if the carver had already died? The working theory, one twin killed quickly, the other left alive, was no longer speculation. It was likely fact, and someone had been there, watching, waiting, long enough to count 38 days, but who? Not a man who disappeared without trace. Not someone who fled the very next day. Someone who had stayed, hidden in plain sight. When they searched the site again this time with deeper shovels, finer screens, and steadier hands, they uncovered something else. A metal object lodged beneath a tangle of roots just beyond the hollow tree. It was a harmonica, badly rusted. One side caved in. A faint trace of red paint still clung to the frame. Faint initials were etched along the top, TB Tommy Black. The harmonica was dry, but the scent of rot still clung to its reed slots. It had been there a long time, not just dropped, but placed, covered, hidden. Tommy had once been known for carrying it, annoying classmates with off-key tunes. A teacher recalled him playing it at recess the week before the girls disappeared. He'd stopped after that, said he lost it. When investigators confronted him in 2009 with the evidence, his face remained blank, but his fingers twitched, tapping against his leg in a rhythmic, compulsive pattern. "I never went up there," he repeated. "Never." The harmonica said otherwise. The theory shifted. Perhaps Tommy had followed the girls. Perhaps he'd taken the harmonica to lure them off the trail. June had liked music, followed it instinctively, her sister said. Had he called them into the trees, the community was ready to believe it. Tommy had always felt like a predator, even if no one had dared say it aloud. His silence, his isolation, the shed incident, the eyes that stayed too long. But there were fractures in the timeline. The harmonica had dirt packed inside its soil containing root matter that hadn't spread through the area until months after the disappearance, according to botanists familiar with the grove's growth patterns, which meant the harmonica had not been dropped during the crime. It had been returned to the scene, buried deliberately years later. As a deflection, a breadcrumb planted for someone to find. The harmonica hadn't stayed with Tommy. It had passed through someone else's hands, someone who wanted the trail to lead anywhere but toward himself. Someone who had reason to visit that tree again, long after the bodies were hidden. Someone who had come back, quietly. The photo surfaced almost by accident, tucked into the back of an old scrapbook donated to the Absarokee Historical Society. It was labeled County Fair 1972 in slanted handwriting. Most saw it as a sweet relic, until someone looked closer. There in the background of a group shot by the goat pens stood Curtis Laurie, straw hat, collared shirt, and affixed to his vest a novelty button, red and white, circular, faded but unmistakable. "I'm Goat Grandpa." The joke had been part of a promotion that year. Only 6 such buttons had been printed, handed out at the livestock pavilion to older men with family entries. Curtis had no children, no goats, but he had that button, worn with pride. It would have been a benign curiosity if not for the plastic fragment recovered from beneath the hollow tree. Same size, same ridged backing, same fractured edge curved just so. Tested side by side, the match was conclusive. Curtis had been there, not just the day the girls disappeared, but at the exact tree deep in the forest where their bones were found decades later. He had always seemed peripheral, helpful, present but forgettable. The man who brought food, who fetched flashlights, who offered extra blankets when the search ran late. Yet his name had never made the suspect list. He was a friend a fixture. Even John North had vouched for him, remembering the fence work that morning, the smile, the casual farewell. Only now did he remember the oddness of it, how Curtis had said goodbye twice, once at noon, and again hours later, pretending it was the first time. How he'd seemed off, sweating despite the cool weather, his boots coated in a dust that didn't match the North Ranch at all. The timeline unraveled slowly. Curtis had borrowed a truck that day, never returned it until after midnight. He claimed he'd gotten lost on a back road after delivering feed. No one had checked. He wasn't on the list. The button had fallen, or been torn. A mistake. A relic buried in the same roots that cradled the girl's remains, and that wide, generous smile, remembered now as too wide, too practiced, had hidden far more than discomfort. It had hidden truth. By the end of 2009, the sheriff's office no longer spoke publicly about Curtis Laurie. But behind closed doors, files thick in patterns emerged, and the silence that had protected him for decades began to fray. The debt Curtis owed John North, $1,200, was due on September 22, 1972. The same day, Alice and June disappeared. According to John's old ledger, Curtis had promised to repay it that morning, in cash. He even wrote the amount on an envelope and left it in the ranch house mailbox. But the envelope was empty. Just a folded scrap of paper with a smiley face drawn in red ink. John never told the sheriff. He thought it a joke, a delay. Curtis had always repaid in time before. But now, with the fare button matched and the timeline exposed, it looked less like whimsy and more like mockery. Curtis had motive. The pressure of debt. The humiliation of owing an old friend. And he had opportunity. The girls had been sent out that morning on Curtis's suggestion to help with the goats. He had offered to meet them halfway, bring water. June's harmonica was around her neck. Alice carried a bag of sweet oats. The field where the goats grazed was less than a mile from the tree. A hidden path connected the pasture to the western woods. Curtis knew it well. He had helped blaze that trail during a fence project in 1968. No one thought to ask if he went near it that day. The harmonica, the D carved backward, the tally marks, all too easily blamed on others. Curtis had watched the town fixate on Tommy on Dale, never once needing to deflect, only to nod to help to stay present. He was the search party, the volunteer, the man holding the flashlight while others looked away. He never left. Because he didn't need to. When they questioned him again, Curtis smiled the same practiced smile. Denied everything. Said he hadn't worn the button in years, that he hadn't stepped near the West Woods since '71. But the forest had remembered, the roots had remembered, and now so did the town. It was not the scream of a stranger that lured the girls from the trail. It was the voice of someone they trusted. They had misread the marks. Everyone had. 38 shallow scratches etched into the inside bark of the cottonwood tree. First seen as a child's attempt to mark time, or a killer's twisted memorial. But under ultraviolet light, the pattern changed. Faint symbols between every seventh notch. Vertical strokes grouped unevenly. Not a calendar, not a countdown. A ledger. The marks weren't tracking days. They were measuring starvation. A forensic anthropologist confirmed it. The bone growth in June's remains indicated she survived far longer than Alice, possibly over a month. The pattern of marrow depletion, the curvature of her ribs, they spoke of prolonged malnutrition. Alice had died early, likely on the day of the disappearance. A single blow, clean and swift. The blood found on the rock in 1972 supported that. June, smaller, quieter, was taken, kept, hidden. The carving style of the tally marks changed halfway through. The early ones were etched with consistency, careful, deliberate. The later ones were erratic, often overlapping, carved at desperate angles. Some were dug so deep they stripped the bark clean. June had been marking her own captivity, but not alone. Two of the early tally marks bore indentations inconsistent with a child's hand, sharper pressure, larger spacing, as if someone else, someone stronger, had helped her begin, had shown her how, perhaps as a way to pretend care or to foster obedience. Curtis Laurie's fingerprint was not recovered in the tree. But a partial palm print, unidentifiable for decades, was matched to a smudged index card he once used to register a voter ID in 1969. It was there, pressed faintly on the inner curve of the hollow near the highest tally. Investigators began reconstructing the site. The angle of the hollow, the thickness of surrounding trees, the absence of recent disturbance. They realized something chilling. From the right vantage point, the cottonwood could be seen clearly, from the old hunting blind 70 feet uphill, long abandoned but once used by ranchers in the 50s. Inside, the blind buried beneath years of pine needles, they found a metal lunch tin, rusted shut. Inside, wrappers and a scrap of cloth, a child's ribbon, red. Curtis hadn't just taken her. He had watched her, fed her, counted her days, and let her die slowly, methodically, as if repaying his debt one breath at a time. Curtis Laurie was arrested on a cold morning in late October 2009. He didn't run, didn't argue. He simply stood in the doorway of his small home behind the feed store, wearing the same wool coat he'd worn in old fair photos, hands still smelling faintly of seed and oil. The charges read like a confession etched in bone: murder, unlawful confinement, intentional harm to a minor. But in court, he said nothing. Not once. Not when presented with the harmonica. Not when shown the fragment of the button that had slipped from his vest buried beneath the roots. Not even when June's final tally marks, trembling desperate, were projected on the courtroom wall. Only when asked why he did it, why he lured 2 girls into the trees, why he killed one and caged the other for 38 days, did he move. He smiled. Not the warm grin Absarokee knew, but something colder, empty. Then she was quiet. She listened. No one ever really listened. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge asked if he had anything more to say. Curtis looked down at his wrists, shackled now. "John thought I was nothing," he muttered. "But they looked at me like I was someone." His words hung heavy. For the town, the truth was worse than any fiction. Evil had not crept in from the outside. It had sat beside them, poured coffee, delivered supplies, smiled at church socials. Curtis Laurie had been in their family photos, their memories. And all the while, June had been alone in the dark, scratching her days into a tree hollow, while the man who called himself a family friend watched from a blind above, pretending care, rationing food, whispering promises that never came true. Her final mark, shorter, crooked, almost hesitant, was found inches above a broken root. Forensic analysts believe she made it while sitting, too weak to stand. As they lowered Curtis into a prison van, Lindsey Wexler stood at the edge of the lot, watching. As they closed the doors, she looked at the tree one last time. The real journey was just beginning. In the end, that was the lesson: evil might hide behind familiar faces, but truth endures. As she moved toward her car, Lindsey squeezed her sister's hand. "I still dream about her sometimes. She made it through 38 days. So can we." They stepped toward healing, toward a future they would build one day at a time.
Thank you for listening to Brody's Stories. Until we meet again.